Do you remember when the moon blinked? I don't suppose you do, or that's what I assume, anyway. From what I've heard, it didn't seem to affect anyone else outside of this small town, outside the Grady. I don't understand how something like the moon completely blinking from existence is something that could be territorial, but maybe I'm just focusing on that aspect of things in an effort to come to terms with the reality of what happened that night. Somehow, Henry Roland, Old Man Roly-Poly, as folks around here used to call him, somehow he knew it was coming, or at least had an idea of it. I'd come to understand that, later on, he'd always seemed like a bit of a mad old guy, the quintessential nut of this little slice of America. Of course, this town has no shortage of those types. There's something about this place, you know? There's something dark, lingering beneath the surface of it. I was born here and grew up with the tales of lizard people living underneath the woods and even ancient gods presiding over the mountains just outside of town. Being the only place I've ever lived, I can't speak to whether or not this is normal. Some haunted history, defining the inherited madness of some of the elders. For all I know, every town has mysterious legends inked in blood, dating centuries back. But this one, well, I have experienced the darkness more viscerally than I ever could have imagined. Old Man Roland lived just a few houses down from me, so when he started his, renovations to his house, I didn't know what to think. Other neighbors didn't seem to think much about it, just shrugging it off as simple eccentricities, but there was something in his time-worn eyes as he aggressively slopped the black paint over his exterior walls. Something almost frantic and maniacal that made me hesitant to approach him. I've always gotten along with Henry, have since I was a little tyke, even though I'm almost 35 now. I don't remember him ever looking young. The house in which I live is the same one I grew up in. After my father passed, just a little after my 18th birthday, I felt no desire to move out. The mortgage was paid off some years before his car went off the road, on the outskirts of town. So, I just stuck around. With his life insurance, I was able to spruce up the place a bit, make it more my own than some monument to the dead. It was always my old man in me, for as long as I can remember. My mother apparently didn't survive my birth, but my father was the most loving and caring parent you could imagine. Yeah, he had a few relationships over the years, but no one that stuck around for long, with that portion of his heart still exclusively possessed by the one he lost the day I was brought into this world. I still remember the day I lost him, as though it was just yesterday. He was only planning to be gone for a few days, some business trip of some kind. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. My old man had his hands in a lot of creative ventures. It made us a good living, even if he never really got into much detail with me about any of it. I asked him where he was going that morning. He just gave me that classic smirk. "Never too far away, Jackie boy," he told me, just like he said every time he headed out on one of these trips, whether going to the other side of the country or just a few towns over. Jackie boy, he always called me that. Even though he named me Jack after his father, to the rest of the world, I was simply Jack Corrigan. But I was Jackie boy to him and him alone. I miss him, still, so damn much every single day. But none of that is important or relevant to what was going on with Henry Roland. The point is that, ever since I was a kid, I was friendly with Roland, and even enjoyed some of his crazy stories and theories. We maintained something of a relationship through the years, even when kids at school would give me shit for being buddies with the resident nutcase. I can't say I ever paid much attention to that sort of childishness, even when I was a child myself. At first, when I walked over to Henry's house to see him practically lathering his walls in jet black paint, I was worried, you know? He had to be pushing 80 by this point, but his movements were so erratic. I was scared that he was having some sort of episode. All things considered, he was in remarkable shape for his age, and hadn't suffered many medical issues in his past. Even with that, I just knew that something had to be going on with him. No medical issues, yes, but no one could deny that he had some serious ghosts upstairs, lurking beneath his haunted brain pan. Finally building up the nerve to approach him after standing before the already blacked-out wooden fence, still reeking of wet paint, for God knows who long, I just called out his name. He didn't respond at first, just kept slapping his paint-soaked brush against the siding. When I reluctantly creaked open the gate, though, he practically jumped out of his skin. When he looked back at me, his skin so pale, a stark contrast to the already darkened walls, that I almost felt like I was staring at his corpse. I suddenly couldn't find words. We just stared at each other for a moment, the specks of paint splattered across his checkered shirt, khaki pants, smeared across his face, and dripping from his fingers. Such a bizarrely unsettling sight. And before I could find the words to ask the simple question, "Why are you painting your house?" he preemptively gave me the unwarranted reply. "When the lights go out, they can't see you in the black." With that perplexing retort to my unasked question, he just turned back to what he was doing, acting as though he hadn't even seen me or spoken a word. I just slinked back out of his yard, the squealing hinges of his gate only inspiring him to pause the stroke of his brush for a second at best. By the time I arrived back home from work that night, Henry's entire house was matted in that eerie color scheme. He'd even covered the windows, with a scattering of empty paint cans left strewn across his yard. I could still see a vague light peering through the glass, as his brushstrokes were chaotic at best, but I still couldn't wrap my mind around this. As always, it took me a while to wind down from my shift at the gas station, just down from the Grady City Limits sign. But with my normally friendly, if eccentric neighbor's erratic behavior still bewildering my thoughts, the struggle to just settle down and relax was all the more troubled. By the following morning, I had decided to just brush the whole thing off as a potential onset of dementia, given Roland's advanced age and already, unpredictable mindset. I was still worried about the guy, but not enough to approach his now strangely haunting house. Over the next few days, this impromptu home renovation became the talk of the town. Many of the regulars at the gas station knew I was friendly with the old guy, inspiring them to grill me about any knowledge I may have on this. But I had nothing to offer. I was still as unsettled as the rest of them, perhaps more so, given that I actually had something of a relationship with the guy. As it would turn out, that Saturday, when I was scheduled to work the late shift, I would get some answers about the unusual paint job, as well as the cryptic words with which my old friend had shared some days prior. May 18th, 2019, at 1 o'clock in the morning. That was when the moon blinked above the little town of Grady. Things had been fairly busy that night. Yeah, this town isn't exactly bustling or anything, even on the weekends, but traffic could be fairly constant at times. This particular gas station, Patty's Gas and Slip, was just down from the city limits, with the next building just a quarter mile or so up the road being Gideon's, the second most popular of the 13 or so bars in town. So yeah, it could get hectic at times. I learned to just tune out the especially loud, ass-off-their-drunk customers who would stroll in on nights like these. Yeah, they could be obnoxious, especially those who had only recently earned the right to legally buy alcohol, but I kept one of my earbuds in when working the later shift. Sure, I'd have to cut the music if anyone should ask for anything in particular, but I would generally just keep listening when I was just on the receiving end of some drunken small talk. Honestly, I've never been especially skilled with meaningless conversation from even the more clear-minded. The nods and agreeing smiles made for a good enough default response. There were only 4 townsfolk staggering the aisles of the small convenience store, with 2 more pumping gas outside, when things began to grow dimmer. At first, I honestly can't say I was paying much attention. I was just playing a mindless game on my phone with my music tuning out the giggling, obviously hammered group. When one of them shrieked, it immediately shot my attention back to the world around me. Prepared to roll my eyes at the dramatic performance of the maybe early 20s brunette who clutched the arm of the tall and lanky guy she was with, it took me a second to realize that all 4 of them just glared out the window. When I noticed not only the moonlight steadily growing darker beyond the glass, I also realized the lights inside were dimming as well. Strolling around the counter to get a better look at what had the undivided attention of my customers, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Upon cutting my gaze to the sky, before I even realized what I was doing, I found myself standing in the parking lot, alongside the quartet who steadily whimpered. It's hard to describe and really do justice to the sensation of what my unblinking eyes met, but imagine eyelids cupped around the moon itself, gradually closing. It was subtle, the movement of the upper and lower lids as they caused the shimmering orb to narrow, but the effects of the world around me was unmistakable. The lights of the gas station, the illuminated sign, and even the headlights of the two vehicles parked by the pumps, whose drivers now shared our entranced gaze. Even those grew dimmer the slimmer the moon shrank. Briefly breaking my eyes from this bizarre sight, I glanced at my phone, the vision of the screen darkening only hastening my pulse all the more. By the time there was only a sliver of light provided by the night sky, I could barely make out the hand before my face, and when it snuffed out completely, I don't believe I have ever encountered such darkness my entire life, both before that night and since. Muffled screams echoed from somewhere to my left, along with far more distant howls from the direction of where the pumps used to be, not to mention my own involuntary moaning. But even those anguished shrieks had no, weight to them, I suppose, like somehow the lack of any light made even the sound waves struggle to find something against which to reverberate. And there was no wind, not even a breeze, as though the world had suddenly ceased its once unending orbit around a sun that may as well have vanished in the same manner as the moon. I was patting my hands against my body, just to assure myself that I still had form, but even my touch felt muted, regardless of the fact that my heart felt as though it may break free any second. My feet were steadily backing away from the world which had disappeared before me, until I felt my back press against what I hoped to be the exterior wall of my place of employment. Frantically slapping my hands to the flat surface, I began my attempt to guide myself back to the door, through which I had exited, with my head in the disintegrating clouds. I could hear the shuffling of more feet and the steady, muffled whimpers of those I could no longer see, but they were far from my concern at the time. The knowledge that I had some semblance of company in this unimaginable pitch darkness did set me at ease to a point, though that didn't account for much, when the other sound rang out across the land. Unlike those empty noises provided by those I hoped to still be nearby, just so I wouldn't be completely alone in this, these rang so much clearer, so much louder, and agonizingly viscerally. They were unlike anything I had ever heard, or knew how to comprehend. The best way I can describe them is something of a chorus of inverted screams, like something inhaling while wailing, as though the sound should echo into the mouth rather than from it. It felt like the last breath of one dying a most brutal and painful demise, amplified to a volume which could reach the other end of town, perhaps the farthest reaches of the state, compared to my own soundtrack feeling so far away. Though these haunting howls felt distant, I could almost swear that whatever provided them were only inches from my ears. Even with the volume of my rapid pulse unable to reach my ears, the sensation of the hastened tremor within my chest made every desperate breath I was taking almost as strained as if I had a pillow pressed to my face. I knew I had to control it, that I could not allow this fear to consume me, likely leaving me passed out on the unseen ground. I had to, somehow, find a place to hide from whatever was out there, from whatever had been birthed by the moon's retreat from the sky. I heard the muffled scuffling of other feet nearby, my chaotic thoughts all over the place, forgetting that I had some semblance of company before the lights went out. Was it the customers from before, or those providing that terrible sound, which now echoed from closer than before? Though part of me was desperate to know that I wasn't alone, my fear would not allow me to call out to the others. I couldn't draw attention to myself or risk giving away my position. It was completely irrational, I knew that, but somehow I had no doubt that whatever was out there had no problem seeing through this endless pitch. Before I exited the building, against which my back remained pressed, my head had already been distant, consumed by the slimming moon above. Had I run left or right after pushing through the door? Surely if I had just darted straight forward when I backed away from the perplexing sights around me, I would now be leaning against the door itself, right? Though my sensation of touch was so heavily dulled, I drifted my palm across whatever was at my back, hopefully that my finger may meet the latch. The surface was smooth, though not something I completely knew how to describe, with my nerve endings so muted. It was glass. It had to be glass. How long had this been going on? How long since light vanished from the world? The memories of whatever life I lived before felt as distant as my home. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, it felt like both minutes and weeks since I wandered out from my post to see what had made the drunken customers so worked up. When another chorus of those gargled shrieks bellowed out from what could be anywhere from a few feet to a half-mile away, though, I knew I had to get moving fast. As I shuffled to the left, keeping my back against the grass, I could vaguely make out something else skidding across the concrete. While the rational part of my brain, which still existed in chronological time, understood that it was most likely one or more of the other people out there with me, the part which had abandoned all reason began to panic. When I felt a dull sensation of something squeezing my upper arm, I couldn't even hope to hold back the scream. Somewhere in the distance I could make out whispering voices, urging me to calm my veritably submerged wailing, that rational mind grasping to take hold of my scattered thoughts again. "Calm down," a slightly panicked voice spoke from somewhere far away. "We have to work together. We have to get back inside." I replied, the vibration of my throat and tongue the only thing assuring me that these words were indeed spoken by me. "Where's the door?" Another voice hummed. "Come closer to me," I said, trying to make my slapping against the window at my back audible enough for them to hear. Again, I heard gently scuffling feet, followed by my barely resonating taps against glass from beside me, each one more distant than the last. There was another whisper that I couldn't quite make out, repeating 3 times over, a little louder with each. The fourth and final repetition met my ears enough to understand what was happening. "She found the door." Over what felt like a half hour, maybe longer, with the hand of my neighbor clasped in mine, we made our way back to the door we had exited so long ago, each step feeling as though we walked through a knee-deep swamp. From what I could figure out, from the patches of conversation I could put together, all 4 of those who had left the store with me had made their way to the side of the building against which my back was pressed. We spread apart, each of us gripping the hands of those beside us, moving as a group to the side. As the last one in line opened the door, in all honesty, with the lack of any air movement outside, I couldn't tell the difference from being inside, only that we had passed through an entryway which gently shut after I crossed through. It wasn't until I tripped over what a distant memory assured me to be a rack of sunglasses that I accepted that we were indeed indoors now. Unfortunately, even encased between walls now, those repeating howls from whatever drew closer by the second, still sounding as though they were right next to us. Knowing that the sunglasses display was right next to the door, I waved my hands before me, attempting to locate the locking mechanism. It took me a while, or so it felt, and when I snapped the deadbolt shut, I could count on neither the sensation nor the vague sound to assure me that my mission had been a success. But I wouldn't accept this to be enough to keep us safe from whatever was out there. "We have to get to the storage room," I said, waving my hands around in search of any of my colleagues. All of their voices had grown so distant, I had no way of knowing if they could even hear me. But when something gently tapped my shoulder, drifting down my arm and weaving between my fingers again, I knew what was happening. After a whisper told me that all of our hands were linked again, I knew that I was leading the way this time through the foreign land around us, in search of the door behind the counter, which felt miles from where we stood. With one free hand and one conjoined with another, I waved my arm around in search of the aisle between rows of shelves I knew once to exist in this place. It took a while, some soundless stumbling over my own feet, and a few items being nudged to the floor, with a gentle brushing against my legs on their descent. But when my fingertips made light contact with what I believed to be shelves, waving them to the other side to feel more presumed shelves parallel from that prior obstacle, I was confident that I was guiding my silent convoy down one of the aisles. Every step was still slow and hesitant, mixed with reluctant apprehension with each footfall, but if my memory served me well, I was certain that the counter, behind which the storage room was located, was only a short distance ahead. About what I presumed to be halfway down the aisle, Judging by the space between each trudging step, another distant but almost alarming sound met my ears, inspiring me to stop in my tracks. Another faraway scream, something gargled and moist, but unmistakably human, blended with the tapping against what I would suspect to be the glass of the windows. As that wailing softened, becoming more stuttered, the tapping grew heavier and more dense. When that haunting howl, which was so much closer than before, left that human scream hidden away behind it, I fully and truly understood that whatever provided it was far from human. There was a muffled, wet sound of tearing causing that tapping sound to quicken, before falling silent once more. That silence overcame anything else for some time, before a more jarring and more shocking shriek echoed across this little town. It differed from before, like this was a cry of victory, as opposed to an eerie call of something drawing near. It was at that point, as my feet fell rooted to whatever the floor of this convenience store had become, that I remember that I did not just share this gas station with a quartet at my back, but the two who pumped gas when the light faded from this world. Admittedly, I didn't fully recall that there were two, until another combination of gargled whimpers led into more howls of those celebrating in the defeat of a helpless victim. Somewhere deep within my scattered brain, I felt shame for leaving those two to, judging by what sounds I could make out, be torn apart. But when a far less subtle sound of something pounding against the glass rang out, I knew I had no more time to waste, dwelling on the things over which I had no control. "Move," the voice behind me whispered, sounding as frenzied as my heartbeat at the time. I didn't need a second request, shuffling us forward with more haste than before. When I heard that muted sound of glass cracking, I couldn't know with the lowered volume of everything, but whatever was out there was reliable enough to be sure it had only cracked and not shattered completely. My quickened stroll transformed into as much of a run as my quivering legs could accomplish. Through these murky waters I felt as though I was battling. My harried breath became a cough when my stomach made contact with something, almost knocking the wind out of me, causing me to buckle slightly. My fingers slipped free of my traveling companions as I clutched my gut before hastily waving my hand back in search of the one it had released. I let out a shaky exhale when it linked with one of my companions again, and began scaling what I hoped to be the counter in search of the hatch to pass to the other side. More hollow crackling sounds met my ears, my pulse racing when I reached the flap to split the countertop. I had absolutely no doubt that whatever was out there, working on forcing its way in, could clearly see us making our desperate attempts to escape. But I could not let that break my focus. It was not only my life I was attempting to preserve, but those who put their faith in me to guide them to a safe haven. Yes, if these things made it through the glass, something I was certain would happen at any second. I couldn't believe a shabby wooden door would hold them back for long, but this was the only hope I had at the time. I felt more items tumble to the ground as I made my way around the counter, that constant tapping and splitting of the windows making every movement more clumsy than the last. With each object that hit the ground, the muted sounds as they made contact with the hard surface was the only thing that reminded me that I did not indeed have murky water encasing my trembling shell. The only thing that allowed me to believe that the real world still existed behind this blanket of darkness. My fingertips patting down the shelves behind the counter, what were once cigarette packs and cartoons pouring across my legs, I felt my heart leap from its quivering perch when they wrapped around what I just knew to be a doorknob, as that gentle cracking sound somewhere behind us escalated dramatically, making me picture a greenhouse exploding on a television with the volume cranked to its lowest setting. I had no doubt that the five of us were no longer alone in this building. I pulled open the door, the fingers clutching mine slipping free as something nudged my body to the side. Again, I scrambled my hand in search of another, as a second and third nudge almost caused me to topple to the floor. When another set of fingers entwined with mine, stabilizing my swaying frame before yanking me to one side, I heard another muffled scream. While more items tumbled across my legs, more shredding and tearing met my ears, while there was a far more audible heaving breath upon me, I could feel my hair being gently blown, while a muted yet sickening stench met my nostrils, as such an ear-piercing inverted wail almost deafened me. spitting spatters of some sort of liquid across my face. I felt my arm being yanked again, my feet dragging behind me, a distant sound of a door being slammed shut, an ambient clicking allowing me to hope to God that I was on the inside of that now locked shut entryway. My legs gave out, my descent to the floor feeling so slow and dragged out, perhaps due to the fingers still entwined between my own. I felt a dull sensation of my impact with the hard ground, causing me to buckle once more. The gentle rattling of a door and light taps against it that I knew to be a far more violent pounding in reality made even that slightest sensation of hope drift from me as I lay still on the floor. As I heard a far-off noise of splitting wood and haunting animalistic moans, I knew that our desperate escape had been for nothing. All I could do now was wait for the end. Just sit there and await my own body being torn apart just like those who I had left to die in the parking lot. Bracing for my imminent brutal death, my entire body as tense as the crackling door once was, I felt the hand release mine, realizing its owner had been sitting beside me. As I shivered on the tiles, I begged for the fingers to reach for me once more, to not leave me to suffer alone. I can't explain how or why, but I knew they wouldn't. I knew they were leaving, prompting my next desperate words. "Don't go, where are you even going?" I heard a whisper reply in my ear. Between the volume of my quickened pulse gradually ramping up against my eardrums and that splintering wood growing significantly louder, I couldn't fully make out what words were being spoken, but there was a bizarre familiarity to them that I couldn't quite shake. As a fragment of light flickered on before eyes which had only gazed into the deepest pitch of the darkest night for what could be hours or even days, I could vaguely make out a shadowed form rushing the door ahead of me. When the silhouette reached out, the wood completely split down its center. Though its fragment of light was dim at best, it gradually grew brighter and brighter, revealing a strangely out-of-focus, jagged and inhuman limb which appeared as a blackened shadow made of flesh as it forced itself between the two halves of what was once a door. Just as a hauntingly glossy black eye came into view, peering through the splits, that shadowed form from within the room shot forward. What remained of the door blew apart, throwing splinters of wood back out into the store. Something heavy hit the counter. Another of those eerie howls silencing with a resounding impact of two solids striking one another. As the light grew brighter, even the ambient sounds of the world around us, shockingly loud to senses which had grown accustomed to muted echoes and silence. Another series of those anguish wails broke out, but there was something very different about them now. What was once a chorus of confident, goal-driven battle cries was now something of agony and fear. I heard heavy feet beating against the ground and more glass shattering, before one final pain-stricken moan rang out, falling into silence as quickly as it began. I blinked against the light, provided by the fluorescents in the store, beaming through the blasted open door. The whimpers of those with whom I shared the storage room blending with those I hadn't realized were coming from my own mouth. After a time, I broke my watering eyes from the busted open doorway before me, finally secure in the belief that those things were not coming back. Turning my attention back to the others sharing the room with me, I saw the two young women and the tall guy huddled together, crying upon one another, but no sign of the fourth. Choosing not to speak for the time being, not quite ready to find out if my voice still sounded like it used to, I just got to my feet and hesitantly made my way out of the room. The sights which quickly came into focus, the cracked and buckled countertop items heavy and light scattered across the floor throughout the shop, and, most especially, the blood, viscera, and strewn apart flesh, bone, and organs spread across the room before me, once more turned my legs to gelatin beneath me. I had to believe that these grotesque remains pasted to the walls, ceilings, and floor had been what was left of the fourth member of the quartet with whom I had made my way down the aisle, but it was hard to believe that this much carnage could come from only one person. It took me some time to convince myself to get back to my feet again. The rancid stench of human remains, much more potent than I would have imagined. finally inspiring me to practically sprint to the door. Of course, when my eyes met the far more widespread display of dismembered parts pasted to the shattered windows and tarmac, this did not help my fragmenting mental state in the slightest. The Grady Police Department had their hands full by the time the sun began to arise over the small town in ruins. It would seem that each corner of this humble city had been laid to waste that night, with the expectation of a handful of homes and businesses which had managed to remain unscathed. Among those buildings, one of the only houses on my street which had been left untouched was the one which had been lathered in black paint some time before the moon blinked out. To this day, I never asked Henry what compelled him to renovate his home in such a manner, or how he knew this would keep him safe. Perhaps some questions are better left to the imagination. I did, however, once I had rebuilt the damage to my father's house, choose to follow the old man's example, as did every house in my neighborhood and many more homes and businesses alike. Though nothing like this has ever occurred before, as far as I know, maybe this will help should the moon blink again someday. From what I've been able to put together between my own haunted memories and the recollections of those with whom I have spoken about that night, the blink itself only lasted for maybe 10 to 15 minutes in real time in this version of what is real. Maybe that darkness sent this little town somewhere else, where such chronological rules do not exist. Perhaps our perception of time was as muted as every sense in that seemingly unending pitch. It could be as simple as the effect of the fear discombobulating the functions of our brains. Who knows? It's probably for the best that I don't have all the answers, if any, about what really happened when the moon blinked. It wasn't until some months passed by, after the town had recovered from this waking nightmare, once what remains of the dead the creatures had left behind were cremated or buried, when I returned to my job at the gas station. Patrick Abernathy, Patty, as he had instructed me to call him since my first day, the owner of the place, assured me that everything was back in working condition when I arrived for my shift. I requested to be moved to the day shift, the dark of even the most moonlit nights still enough to leave my mind in a bit of chaos. He assured me that he was working on it, but we would be short-staffed for a while, until we could replace those who had either not survived that night or just outright quit. If nothing else, things were quiet that first night back, both a good and a bad thing, given my newfound phobia of silence. Naturally, I kept one of my earbuds in, my chosen soundtrack aiding in whittling away the tedious hours. It wasn't until I had to grab some things from the storage room when my wandering eyes noticed something scratched into the floor, where I had been sitting, fearing for my life not so long ago, that my already fragile thoughts practically threw themselves back to that dark night. It was subtle, just barely edged deeply enough to be visible, vaguely enough to be missed, while the construction crew took care of rebuilding the place. But I knew, the instant I saw it, that it had been left for me, and me alone. Back then, I'd simply assumed the shadowed figure who held back those that battled to enter that room was a fallen member of the quartet with whom I survived that night. Perhaps I just chalked up that last scream before someone dragged me through the door, slamming it shut behind them was one of those who pushed past me to enter, the fear taking hold of them. With how uncertain the source of any muffled sound was that night, it was easy to assume that it could have come from inside the room rather than to my back. But my legs gave out again, leaving me on my knees, on the floor that almost served as my final resting place. The words inscribed into the tiles echoed that parting whisper I had not been able to make out that night. Whether he had found a way to inscribe this while we sat together, awaiting the end, in hopes that I may see it before the darkness consumed me, or the whisper itself somehow carved into the fabric of reality, the message, and who left it, was undeniable. Never too far away, Jackie boy. Oh my, what a story. I turn all my fans off to record these stories so that you don't hear fan noise in the background. I'm about to have a heat stroke. So, great story. I love Will. Will's a great author. Great story. Blood, guts everywhere. I hope his dad didn't die because the moon blinked, or if I missed that part and that happened. His dad died first, and then the moon blinked after. Yeah, great stuff. I'm actually about to die. Ego volt anima vester.